Hi everyone, welcome to the weekly politics show. I'm Cllr Puru Miah with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood on Relax Radio. So in this show, we're going to talk about my announcement, slightly on it, touch upon it, but talk about one of the topics on that announcement, which is Liveable Streets. Second segment, we're going to talk about the impact of the Weavers by-election, which was mainly around Liveable Streets, and then move on to the Afghan refugee crisis, how it might impact Tower Hamlets and East London generally, looking at comparison with the Syrian refugee crisis. And then finally, Andrew's in Germany, and we're going to compare notes between Tower Hamlets and German local government. So we're going to go slightly into a break. After the break, we're going to go straight into my announcement, which was on Monday, 2:00 in the morning, and take it from there. So we're going to go into a short break. Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly politics show. I'm a Councillor Puru Miah with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in this section, we're going to talk about part of my announcement, and I explain why, and focus on a part of it, which is around Liveable Streets. So on Monday, 2:00 in the morning, I think, I tweeted that I'd be not standing as a Labour councillor. So I know a lot of people have been in touch with me as to what that means, etc. So I wanted to make a clear statement here, but if you read my statement, due to certain circumstances around my resignation, I'm having to move places. So I'll be moving out this weekend, and then I'll make a much more of a fuller statement. But I just want to focus on one thing, which is Liveable Streets, and which has been very contentious in the Labour Party, in the Labour group, in the council. It seems to be the issue that is not going away. It has been the key factor in the Weavers by-election and the call for a reset. Now, Andrew, that's something that you've been, so like in our discussions, that you want a reset, and I've been talking to the campaigners and they want a reset. There was a recent, I think today there was an article out on the East End Inquirer by one of the campaigners, Linda Wilkinson, just talking about the frustration of the decision makers not listening to what's happening on the ground. Andrew, do you want to explain what you mean by a reset of the policy?
Yeah, so I think everybody wants livable, nearly everybody wants livable streets. So, there's not actually a real argument over some of the objectives. We would all like to see less traffic, less pollution, improved air quality, and kind of all of the rest of it. But the question is, how do we get from where we are now to where we want to be in the future? And I think part of the problem has been is kind of this feeling that it's all been imposed from top down and not really done with residents, but done against them, and sort of the allegations that it's been done for a very small group of people. So I always come back to, I think, like the original sin of Liveable Streets in Tower Hamlets was Wapping. People in Wapping wanted to stop people driving through their neighbourhood to sort of shortcut the Wapping highway. So there was mass support to do something, but most residents never imagined that meant that they themselves or their taxis wouldn't be able to go from east to west within Wapping. And some of those solutions were easily fixable. And still would have delivered basically what most of us still want, which is a reduction in traffic through our neighbourhoods. So I think we just need to not throw out the baby with the bathwater and sort of just like scrap everything, which is what, Ealing, they did this consultation. I think over 20,000 people responded. And I think what they ended up doing in Ealing, I think I might have got this slightly wrong, but of the 9 schemes, 7 of them are going to be cancelled, but there's an issue with government, which I'll talk about in a minute, because basically they didn't have support from either people within the area or people outside of the area. And they're going to keep 2 of them because actually there was broad support for 2 of those 9 schemes. And I think, you know, that may be one solution, or we just find a way of compromising, you know. So that's why I've always been in favor of bus gates and allowing taxis through, allowing the elderly through, allowing disabled through. And I think that would mitigate, and also allowing local residents through. So people living in Wapping being able to go from west to east and vice versa, but not me, because I don't live in Wapping. So I shouldn't be allowed to drive through Wapping at a rush hour, for example. So I think we need to find some compromise, and that does require Tower Hamlets kind of rethinking and resetting what they do. But a reminder, a lot of livable street stuff is actually sort of pretty basic. It's kind of improving pavements, you know, it's sort of putting in pretty plant pots and things like that. So the real issue is the actual road closures, and you know, the most important thing of all is emergency vehicle access. And I'm, as I said, you know, as Puru said earlier, I'm actually in Germany currently, and I'll do some pictures of this. You know, me going around, you know, the different parts of Germany near where my mum lives, you know, there aren't any blocks, you know, all of the roads are open. There was only one place I saw where they put planters in to stop traffic, but even those ones had wheels in them. So it was very easy to move the planters if they had to be moved. But, you know, but there's also lots of areas where you can just basically, you know, drive through, but driving through is discouraged, and it works very effectively here. And I might talk about that in more detail at a later point, but I don't think we've got the time tonight. So I think we just, we need a reset, but not starting from scratch. Let's keep the good things which have already been done, and just have a rethink about some of those road closures and doing them differently, I think. And doing them with evidence.
Well, I'm seeing sort of like a shift in the implementation. If you look at the Brick Lane scheme, there are no permanent closures. And I did speak to the local councillor just to find out. And he basically sat down and said, we don't want permanent closures. And that allows flexibility in the scheme. And he was saying, yes, the signs went up, but we didn't switch the cameras on for 2 weeks, just to get people to get used to it. And they were going to monitor it. So it allows that flexibility, which, say, in the Weavers Ward, or say the old Bethnal Green Road, which falls part of St. Peter's Ward, there isn't that flexibility. It's basically imposed, and people have to live with the consequences, and it is causing a lot of issues. A lot of it hasn't been thought through. It's left very divided communities. I did write about it. I remember that canvassing session, and it was myself, Mayor John Biggs, and all the councillors. We had a Labour councillors canvassing session, and there was a guy who stopped it. It was a tradesman who lived in the ward, stopped the car, and just basically had a go at the canvassers, saying it's affecting his income. His wife is terminally ill. He's talking about how can he provide care, and he was really, really upset. When we went on the doorstep, that was the issue. And even when we were briefed as canvassers, we were told that Liveable Streets is an issue. And we saw the impact of that in a very safe Labour ward. We've got a non-Labour councillor, and I think there needs to be I think you see things shifting within the administration, within the Labour group of councillors, but there's nothing clearly that's being articulated, and we just need to get some certainty on this. Otherwise, it's going to leave very divided communities, and that's none of us want that. None of us want neighbours pitted against neighbours, etc., etc. Andrew, in terms of a reset, is that something you're thinking of bringing a motion to full council? Because it's going to be the issue in the elections.
Yeah.
Well,
I think, you know, we have to find a method of sort of getting through this in a consensual way, because I mean, like, you know, some of the comments that have been made about, you know, this issue is like Brexit. It has divided communities. And I remember reading last year, there was a disabled charity who sort of consulted their disabled members, and even within the disabled community, this was incredibly divisive as well. So the next full council meeting is on the 29th of September at 7 p.m. There will be various opportunities to speak and various sort of motions written. We'll talk in the next section maybe about, you know, the sort of what this new opposition party, because the Aspire party can now form an opposition group, what they could do or what other councillors could do. But yeah, I do actually, I do thinking about it. I think 29th of September is actually quite a good time to debate this properly, given Weaver's Ward. It gives us a bit of time to have a think about what to do, how we technically do it, whether it's a motion or a petition. I need to have a think about. And as I said, I think we do just need to do a reset that tries to bring people back together again and find some compromise that doesn't, get rid of all of this stuff, but find something that most people are able to live with and continue. Because as I think I've said before, air quality is already improving. The ULEZ introduction, which is coming in a couple of months' time, will further accelerate that process as well, because it means older cars are generally banned from the area. But there are still some areas with very poor air quality, so we need to be focusing more on those areas. So there's still a lot of work to do, and also I'd argue work in other areas as well. So yeah, so maybe that council meeting is a good opportunity to do that reset.
I think we've seen the debate shifting nationally as well. I know definitely the Conservative government is under pressure from, say, local Conservative elected representatives.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen Labour MPs talk out against it in Parliament. Mm-hmm. There was I think there's been change in many of the local Labour administrations where heads have rolled, including Hackney, including Islington. I think Ealing, there was an attempt. No, it's a successful attempt. Sorry, the leader of the council was gotten rid of. So it just seemed that there seems to be a rebellion from the grassroots against something which seems to be imposed from above. In terms of the opposition, in terms of say it's debated in September, is there something that you'd be looking at the budget as well to argue to sort of like get a change? Because I know Tower Hamlets Council is spending a lot of money on this.
Yeah, so from the top of my head, we're spending on Liveable Streets, and some of this has already been spent, but we're still not halfway through the programme. So despite all of the talk, we haven't even reached the halfway point in terms of these schemes. So the total budget is over £24 million, which is obviously a lot of money. But by comparison, the total budget for physical security in terms of the CCTV network is £3 million. So, you could argue that's the priority of the council in terms of the capital spend, at least. It's slightly different in terms of revenue. It's £3 million for CCTV net. And that's mainly kind of just improving the network to make it all digital. It's not actually new cameras. And, and £24 million for Liveable Streets. And I would argue we need to bring them back more into balance. But then the other thing is that, these bus gate cameras, they generate a lot of money. They can easily generate £1 million a year. So this has always been one of my issues with Liveable Streets, is actually they could be self-funding. I wouldn't want bus cameras everywhere. I'm not making that argument. But even, even 5 of them dotted around Tower Hamlets will probably generate between £3 and £5 million a year, which is a lot of money, and would also change behaviour as well. So there's no need to spend all of this money, because that's been one of our other concerns. What happens to all this busgate money? Because you can't just spend it whenever you want. It has to be spent on transport-related stuff. But I think, the other thing about a lot of this Liveable Street stuff, and, it's almost like it's very fashionable, because I've been having sort of lots of, not meetings, but like training sessions with people who work in planning departments and local authorities. And it's very much, it's the fashion now to be sort of anti-car, to get rid of cars. And a lot of the people who are saying this are obviously, middle-class office workers who find it easy to make those kind of choices. And I think that's one of the reasons why this happened, is because a lot of people believed that in this kind of almost fashionable cause, except they didn't consult with people.
Yeah, and I think it goes to the heart of politics here in this borough, as political representatives or political parties, who is our constituent? And I think a lot of the backlash seems to be that a lot of sections in our community feel that they've been left behind, or there isn't anyone advocating for them. And it seems to be that gut feeling, similar to Brexit, of being left behind or not being part of a conversation, and you just want to be heard. But it is going to rumble on and on unless the administration, we have some clarity, and could have an impact in terms of the election. So that nicely brings us to our break, where we're going to talk about the impact of the Weavers by-election, what it means in terms of policy, but mainly in terms of how the council operates and what this new opposition Aspire group are able to do and what powers they have. So we're going to go into a break now.
Cycling in London is not child's play. How to be a better cyclist. Listen to my show, only on Relax Radio. I'm Kevin. Join me every Thursday, 5 p.m. Look forward to seeing you.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly politics show. I'm Cllr Puru Miah with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in this section, we're going to talk about the impact of the Weavers by-election, what it means in terms of policy, but mainly in terms of practically what it means in terms of the Aspire party and their councillors. So Andrew, we saw the famous speech by Cllr Ahmed, the Aspire candidate, who made it clear that this was a Liveable Streets. Part of his platform is Liveable Streets, and his main, if you look at his leaflets, is to get it scrapped, or we don't know what that means, but he is going to campaign on that. Do you see any other policies that that will have an impact in terms of Aspire being an opposition group?
So it's going to be very interesting, and I think that's an important term, is that they are now a group, because previously we did have Councillor Puru Miah from Shadwell Ward, who was an Aspire councillor, but when you have only one councillor, you don't have many opportunities to do very much with the council. But having said that, if you look at the work that Councillor Rabina Khan has done, again, a single councillor on her own as a Liberal Democrat, it does show that you can, do quite a lot, even if you're just a single party member. But what has now happened, so if you go to the council website, there is now a political group called Aspire. They've formally set themselves up as a political group, with Councillor Cllr Ahmed now as the leader of the Aspire group on Tower Hamlets Council, with Puru Miah as well. And that sort of gives them various extra things that they wouldn't have had before as of individual or single councillors. So, for example, they get office space within the council. It means that the next council or in the future council meetings, that there's always kind of one opposition motion that gets debated, whether it's theirs or the Conservative one. That still needs to be sorted out. When it comes to asking questions at council, when you're in a group, you kind of get moved up the schedule, so your questions are more likely to get answered on the night. It didn't happen at the last council meeting for various technical reasons. But yeah, you get a lot more, and also they get officer support, so they'll basically be able to hire, perhaps this is not entirely clear yet, but certainly the Conservative group with 2 members, we get the help of 1 person for 1 day of a week. So in theory, the Aspire group will get something similar as well. So it's going to be very interesting to see over the coming months what they intend to campaign on, and how they will use council meetings, and especially getting close to the May 2022 elections, I expect activity to start ramping up at council meetings. So I think it'll be very interesting to see how they use those because I think that will how they use those meetings, because that will be a clue perhaps to the May 2022 elections and what the issues will be in May 2022.
As part of the opposition group, Andrew, you get to sit with the CEO, Will Tuckley, So you get to sit with the officers, the officer class, the bureaucrats in the council to raise issues or follow up issues. I believe that's once a month. Is that a monthly meeting?
Yeah, so I mean, it works out in practice about every 6 weeks. So yeah, it depends. Normally monthly, or probably about 10 or 11 times a year. So I mean, when we use those sessions for 2 reasons. Number one, to tell Will Tuckley what we think is going on, so as part of his kind of intelligence and understanding what's kind of happening, but also then to try and push the council to do stuff as well. So we raise parking issues on a pretty regular basis, issues with members' inquiries, and a bunch of other stuff. So not necessarily individual cases, but just kind of broader issues, to kind of encourage the council to be more responsive or to respond to specific issues. And in theory, I guess the Aspire Party will have that same ability. And the other thing I keep forgetting, attendance at cabinet meetings. So basically, Mayor John Biggs allows the leader of the opposition group, which is Councillor Peter Golds, to attend the cabinet meetings. And he's got the ability, and when I was leader, I was able to do the same thing. I'd be able to say, I'd like to speak on this item. I wouldn't ask to speak on every single item, because it was an invitation, but we could make a point if we needed to at cabinet meetings. And it was very interesting. So in the period 2014 to 2018, when Aspire or Tower Hamlets First, as they then were within the opposition, they never attended cabinet. They never sort of accepted that invitation. So it's only when we became the opposition after 2018 that we would attend. So we, between Peter and I, we would attend every single cabinet meeting. But Aspire didn't do that pre-2018. It'd be interesting to see whether they take that opportunity in the remaining, because actually in September there are 2 cabinet meetings because there's so much on the agenda. So it'd be very interesting to see how they respond. And I think the test for Aspire is, in my personal opinion, is I didn't think they were a good opposition in 2014 to 2018. I thought they missed lots of opportunities, and it was kind of too shouty at times in council meetings. And I'm not saying the Conservative approach of kind of being more collegiate and trying to work within the system works. I'm not saying that, but we definitely try to do things very differently from them. But it will be, I think, a test case for them over the remaining months before next May, as to how they act as a second opposition group. And if they do a good job, then obviously that will strengthen their case to for Rama to be elected next May.
The other tool that they have is call-ins, so they can call in the mayor's decision, which are made normally in cabinet. It's much easier now. There's more opposition councillors. You need 5 councillors to do a call-in and to argue the case in front of overview and scrutiny for have a decision to be sent back. And again, another statistic is between 2014 and 2018, there was hardly any call-ins. The irony was, one, but there wasn't any by Aspire, I think.
No, so I in 2017, I organised a call-in about the Friday night email that we got at 7:30 p.m. that said the council wanted to spend, I think, £140 million in affordable housing. There was no detail. So we did a call in to try and get more information and detail about that. But that was, I think, pretty much the only one. And that's something that I organised in 2017. So.
Yeah, so that's another test for them, whether they could do call-ins, because that's another way of bringing residents' issues, bringing campaigns, and challenging and providing an alternative. So the ball is in Aspire's court as to what they do with these powers. But going back to Shouty council meetings, I remember as an observer coming into these council meetings, and they were really, really shouty, and it's very subdued from 2018 onwards. Are you expecting that kind of shouty culture to come back, Andrew, with 2 Aspire councillors now?
So I hope not, because my feeling of 2014, obviously this changed. Sure, I should really say 2015 to 2018, not 2014, because obviously this all changed after Mayor John Biggs got elected. It was great theatre, You know, like the best free theatre in Tower Hamlets was to go to a council meeting, but they were a complete waste of time. They were completely unproductive. Whereas what the Conservative group then tried to do was to try and influence stuff by not being shouty, by raising good points and good motion, stuff that was always local. I'm not saying that we were successful, but that was so, you know, what we can sort of go when we come to May 2022, we can talk about all the issues that the Conservative group raised over the years that were relevant to local people. And you know, in some areas we can kind of say, well, we can claim success, whether it actually was us or not. So a good example is a public space protection order on Knox. We did a council motion about that, maybe 2019, I think, saying you should do it. You should copy Lambeth Council and do this. 2 years later, Tower Hamlets Council copied Lambeth and actually did a public space protection order and wasted the opportunity, but that's a separate story. So we could say, well, we raised this and you did this. Whether there's a direct link, I'm not sure, but well, yeah. But I think we can definitely say that we raised this in the council meeting and then something then happened. So
will it also have an impact in terms of the apportionment on the committees? Andrew, have you been approached by council officers saying now, because Labour's numbers have gone down, that there should be apportionment? Like, for example, in the development or the strategic development committee, it's all Labour councillors.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, the reason why in development committee there's only Labour is because Councillor Puru Miah refused to sit on a committee. So even though he's been a councillor for a number of years, he doesn't sit on any committees at all. So it'd be interesting to see with Kabir Ahmed whether. So to answer your question is basically each committee of Tower Hamlets Council should have at least one opposition councillor. And the way it also worked is that in any committee is that there should be a representative from each political group. So you had the Labour group with lots of members and you had the Conservative group with 2 members. So it basically meant that Peter and I were basically on every single committee of the council, except for a couple where in theory, another opposition member was on it. So in theory, with 2 opposition groups, that responsibility is now split. So in theory, half the committee should have 1 Aspire member and half the committee should have 1 Conservative. But whether Aspire want to sit on pensions committee or development committee or licensing committee, general purposes, we'll see. I don't want to, let's see what they want to do. But, you know, one of the things I think the Conservative group have been quite good at, Peter and I, is that we are willing to sit on all of these committees. And it's a lot of work because you have to read the papers and all the rest of it, and you know you don't have many opportunities to say very much. But we've done it. It'll be interesting to see whether Aspire want to take up that opportunity and sit on lots of committees as well. In theory, as I said, all the committees should now have either 1 Aspire or 1 Conservative member on it, which will be a big increase in workload for them.
Yeah.
Well,
let's see. The ball is in Aspire's court. Kabir, if you are watching this program, or if you watch the recording, step up, mate. You know, we're all watching, it's Aspire's chance to show what it means. Showcase if they want to make a pitch to run this borough. This is the time to actually showcase and reach out. And prove to people that what they're about. But the jury's out, as they say, on Aspire. So we're going to go into a break. After the break, we're going to discuss the Afghan refugee crisis. So everyone's watched the news of the collapse of Kabul. It's quite sad, personally for me, because I knew people who actually served there. Friends of mine who actually went out there, trained the Afghan National Army to actually see all that, the collapse, and they did a lot of aid work as well. So it is sad from one aspect of 20 years of failed foreign policy, you could say, and a lot of us oppose that. A foreign policy move, but what do we do with the refugee crisis? We're gonna come back with that and discuss it with Andrew and have some comparison with what Germany does. So we're gonna go straight into a break now. Councillor Puru Miah with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in this section, we're going to talk about the Afghan refugee crisis. So we all watched on the news the collapse of the Afghan government falling to the Taliban insurgents in Afghanistan, reminiscent of what happened in Vietnam. We also saw the helicopters as well. But there is a human consequences to that, which is refugees. And just like in Southeast Asia, there are a lot of people who helped out in terms of, in this case, the British Army and the American Army and other NATO forces. And now their lives and their families' lives are in danger. There have been reports of people, revenge killings, etc. There have been reports of that, and there is a growing call for Britain to fulfill an unwritten promise of protecting these people who risk their lives as interpreters and as support workers, supporting the British government in its aid effort or nation building or occupation, from whatever political perspective you're looking at. Now their lives are at risk, and there is a moral duty as per the debate in Parliament for those refugees to be helped out. Andrew, you've been watching this, and there seems to be a political consensus on both sides that these refugees need to be helped out. There have been a lot of Tory MPs who served in the armed forces who feel that we have a moral obligation, and they made that clear. So we do have a consensus. Now it's just implementing the policy. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, in terms of the debate in Parliament, there are lots of Labour and Conservative MPs who have served in Afghanistan. There are lots of others who have close links. So I think there will be a general push that we should take quite a few people. How many is a difficulty, and we've had some of these debates on social media locally as well. And the common refrain from local people is, but where will they be housed? And that's still an ongoing problem. But I think, inevitably, there will be a number of Afghans who will be coming. Obviously, there's already lots of Afghan refugees in the UK. This is not a sort of a brand new issue that we're suddenly having to deal with. For a number of years now, as one of the largest groups of refugees into the UK, have been Afghans. Whereas in the past, we kind of say, well, Kabul is safe, so we could deport you back to Kabul. Clearly, that's not viable anymore, unless the Taliban really are different from what they were in 1996, 2001. But I think that's unlikely. So I think and to give you some idea of the numbers, the population of Afghanistan is about 40 million people. The population of Syria before the civil war was about 22 million people. Somalia was about sort of 10 to 15 million people. So we're talking about, a pretty big country. And even though most Afghans will go to Pakistan or Iran or the, Tajikistan or Uzbekistan to the north, clearly some of them will be coming to Europe, and the Germans are already committed to taking quite a few. The Canadians have also committed to taking quite a few. So certainly you can imagine potentially tens of thousands of Afghans coming to the UK over the coming years. And inevitably some of them will come to Tower Hamlets, and it may be in numbers similar to the Somali population that we have today. I mean, that's just speculation on my part, but certainly that's possible. And the question is, what do we do about it?
Well, I grew up in a town, Bedford, which the government uses to house refugees. So we do have a large Afghan community, and they seem to have well integrated. They've set up independent businesses and brought a vibrant mix to already a multicultural community there. So in terms of settling refugees, would each local authority be asked to sort of like give a number? And how does it work, Andrew, from your experience or from your research into this issue?
I think my understanding, because of the housing problems, is you can't put them all in one physical location. So you are going to have to spread them around the country. And there are some parts of the country who have a housing situation slightly easier than what we have in London. So I think inevitably that they will be spread around the country. and that has good and bad features. So one of the things, so for example, where I am in Germany, there's a very large sort of refugee population, and that's quite noticeable for, the last sort of 10, 15, well, certainly last 5 to 10 years, it's become quite noticeable. And this is one of the interesting things about refugees. I mean, there's an argument that they should all kind of go to a place with other Afghan refugees, because then they can form their own support networks. So maybe many of them go to Bedford, because traditionally what has happened with refugees is they've tended to concentrate in certain areas. So the Jewish population, Orthodox Jewish population, is concentrated in North London. There's a large sort of Hindu Sikh community to the west of London. But then the problem with that sort of is that you then sort of have communities that are kind of separate from the rest of them and perhaps don't integrate as well. Also puts a lot of pressure on local areas in terms of housing and medicine and all the rest of it. But then, I don't know what the job situation is like in Bedford, but the reality is that London is still probably the place that will generate the most jobs over the next 5 to 10 years. And ultimately, refugees will need jobs, because it's not going to be sustainable for them just to live on benefits for the rest of their life. And this is one of the problems with Germany, is that some refugees, I think, have adapted very well. The Syrian, 1.5 million Syrians came to Germany in 2015, huge numbers. And I wouldn't say they're invisible, but it's kind of like they've almost disappeared within Germany and kind of settled down, and it's not really noticeable. I mean, you notice a few people working in the supermarkets whose name tags suggest they're of Syrian origin, but they speak German. So, at a distance, they sort of, they all kind of fit in. But there's also a Somali population in this town who don't seem to have adapted so well, but then they might be much more recent immigrants as well. So, and this is the thing about Tower Hamlets, we've always been the natural first home for many immigrant groups. My assumption had been, the next big group would be people from Hong Kong. But what if it's people from Hong Kong and people from Afghanistan who are coming, and how do we plan and prepare for that, given the lessons we've learned from, let's say, the Somali community?
Well, we are housing refugees. I remember you and I sitting on the Health Scrutiny Committee where the Home Office has temporarily housed quite a lot of refugees, especially refugees coming from the English Channel, temporarily housed in that. So there is a sizable, but the idea was that they'll be dispersed. So do you see the same kind of approach with the Afghan refugees, where Tower Hamlets is a holding area just to deal with the numbers before they're dispersed? And are we equipped to help those kind of refugees? I know there were questions raised in terms of the Health Scrutiny Committee about council resources in terms of that.
Well, I mean, in some areas we're very well equipped, because financially we're better off than many other local authorities, and we have quite a large public health team. The problem is always is housing, and we do have, because of COVID and sort of hotels and hostels being emptied out, we do have lots of temporary accommodation, but that's not going to be suitable for in 5 to 10 or 15 years time. And again, it comes back to where is there housing availability? But then because of Brexit and COVID, allegedly, and we still don't really know the numbers, lots of Eastern Europeans have left. Will some of them, their jobs be taken over by people from Afghanistan or places like that? And it's certainly possible. I mean, there's lots of Afghans, who are reasonably well educated, who've done, especially if they're coming from Kabul, they'll have worked for international organizations. So they'll be, they'll be reasonably well qualified and understand how the world works. And I think that's one of the great differences about Afghanistan, is because of social media and maybe not Twitter. I don't know what they use in Afghanistan, whether it's Facebook or other things or WhatsApp, but people are much more educated about the world now than they were in the first Taliban regime in 1996 to 2001. So people will have aspirations, and I've read some very interesting interviews with some young Afghan women who are well educated. I don't see them staying in Afghanistan, and I could see them, being quite a success in the UK if they're given the support to do that. And if they also, and one of my concerns, if you do farm out people across the whole UK, some of them are going to go to places where there are just not jobs available for them. So yeah.
Well, it brings into an interesting debate about British.
Sorry, I lost you.
Foreign policy. I know there's been a lot of debate. Sorry, have you got me back now? Andrew, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I lost you for a few seconds though.
Yeah. So it's brought into interesting debate about the direction of British foreign policy and Britain's role in the world. We kind of like it's post-Brexit, so we're looking out towards the world with our back to Europe, for example, rather than facing towards Europe with our back towards the world. But it also, do we have an isolationist approach? Do we intervene? What is Britain's role in the world? And what are the limitations? And the Afghan crisis has shown. What your take on it, Andrew? Because you've travelled around the world and you've had an interesting experience. Where do you see the future? Do you see us sort of like retreating back or moving forward?
Yeah, so I just think, so I wasn't able to watch the debate in Parliament, I think on Wednesday, but I read some of the commentary about it, and so people saying that there's a disconnect between what people were saying and our ability to actually deliver. And I think Afghanistan will be like, we'll look back on it like Suez, one of the great disasters in British foreign policy history, all of this time and money for 20 years. And yet, in retrospect, I think everybody knew it was going to fail. Because I read there was a very good Economist article, which actually I remember reading back in 2019. But in 2019, The Economist was reporting that when truck drivers drove through Afghanistan, is that when they drove through a Taliban area, they paid, one tax, they got a receipt, and then at every checkpoint thereafter, the Taliban fighters would not tax them again. It would only be taxed once in Taliban territory. But as soon as they went into government territory, every single police checkpoint will tax them. So if you're a lorry driver, there's no way you're going to support the government. And some of the other stuff, which we knew about. I mean, we knew about these issues years ago about the corruption in government and the ghost soldiers and all the rest of it. So that we didn't know this was going to happen and didn't have a plan for it, I think, shows how bad the UK government is, and not just UK, but US government was as well on some of these issues. So I think it will be one of the great foreign policy disasters. And, and this whole global Britain narrative, how does that fit in with it? And, we don't talk about in these radio shows, but I have a great interest in military subjects and know a lot about military stuff. But some of the military procurement is a complete disaster as well. In terms of our ability to buy new armored vehicles, it's a disaster. So it's not just this one area. There are other areas where we have real deep-seated problems. And I think it just comes back to, our government isn't that good and isn't that competent, and therefore, what do we do about it at a local level and try and adapt? And we'll talk in the last section about Germany, that the German system is kind of is less dependent on central government. But we'll talk about that in a few minutes' time. So
I think for me, the sad reflection is a lot of people from Britain gave their lives to mission. I know. So like speaking to friends in the army, there was a lot of discussion within the army whether this is the correct action, but they're professionals. Once the politicians made the decision, they went in, they did their job in very difficult circumstances. And a lot of them stayed behind to try to do nation building, I don't know, whatever, quote unquote. Yeah. And it seems like, a lot of treasure and blood has been spilled with no tangible result, and I think it is something to reflect upon whenever politicians do send troops abroad. It's not their sons and daughters who are risking their lives or giving their lives. So it's something to reflect, because there are consequences. People do suffer from PTSD and other after effects of combat, and it lives with those individuals and the communities that they are in. So something to reflect on before we go to a break. So we're going to go into a break. After the break, we're going to discuss Germany. So Andrew's in Germany, and we're going to compare notes with Tower Hamlets and Germany. So we're going to go into a break and compare notes.
But now
if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, you've had one to forget, God, there'd be an inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Well, I haven't rejected your son.
I want to talk about, how the generation gap, how much has changed, especially when you check the youth nowadays in comparison, to people back in the day.
I'd say when I was younger, it was more disciplined. Not now.
In comparison to now.
Not at all. Not now. The way things are nowadays, the younger generation, you seem that they can't accept the word no. If that makes sense. They can't
accept rejection, essentially, is all you're trying to say.
Yeah, they can't accept the word no. So if you, how did I do? Well, you didn't do very well. And they get upset, and when I was a youngster, my father used to say to me, because I used to be sport mad when I was very young, well, I still am sport mad, but like participating in different sports, and if I had a bad game, for example, he'd say to me, you had one to forget. That's it.
Yeah, that sounds like a smart guy. I mean, yeah, that's the real fact of the matter, yeah.
He'd say to me, you had one to forget. Get over it. And that was it. So I dust myself down and do it again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, you've had one to forget, God, there'd be an inquest. An inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Well, I haven't rejected your son. Or daughter. I've just told them that they need to buck their ideas up.
That's the truth right there. I mean, if you think about it, if you check the generations, like right now in the US as well, I've seen a lot of these things as well. In the UK, you get medals for participation. But what's the point? What are you trying to? Yeah, what's the point? Either you win or you lose. People are so afraid to put that whole notion of losing. When it comes to right now, the generation gap is just crazy. How much. A lot has changed. Social media has taken control of our lives, and we don't even realize it anymore. We're crippled because of it.
That's absolutely right, Nick. Because, as you said, nowadays it seems that you get rewarded for failure. For the life of me, Nick, I can't get my head around that. Perhaps I'm just getting old and morbid. I don't know. I just can't get my head around how you could be rewarded for failure.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly politics show. I'm Cllr Puru Miah with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in this section, we're going to discuss Germany. Andrew's in Germany, and they seem to be doing things better than us, Andrew. It seems like we seem to invent things, but the Germans seem to take those up and do it better than us, like football or making cars, for example. And I think we got quite a few lessons to learn from in terms of local government. So Andrew, tell us your experience of local government in Germany, and I'm sure there's a lot of things that they do better than here in Tower Hamlets, especially the rubbish collections, which I seem to be getting.
So I'm when I get some time, and I don't have much time now, but when I get some time, I'll do a series of tweets about this. So, for example, I tweeted my mum's bins, because she's got in her kitchen, she's got 5 bins for all the different types of waste, and then where it goes within the town. So and I'm not saying Germany is perfect, by the way, or that in Britain we don't do some things better, because we definitely do. But there are some things where the Germans are basically better than us at. So I'm in a small, medium-sized town called Memmingen in southern Germany. It's kind of south of Ulm. It's got a population of about 45,000 people. It's kind of like a town on its own with countryside around it. It was what's called an imperial city since about the year 1200. So it's always been like a major center for centuries and centuries. But what I find fascinating is that this town of 45,000 people, if you look at all of their social infrastructure, swimming pools, gyms and all of the rest of it, they've got almost as much as the whole of Tower Hamlets in terms of public infrastructure, and their playgrounds are basically much better. So they have this thing that if there's a new area where they're building new homes, then the council will build a new playground. So the bigger the development, the bigger the playground, which is something that we don't do. We rely on developers to do it with not very good outcomes. But yeah, there are a range of areas where the Germans are definitely sort of ahead of us, and that's in part because of government, just being more forward thinking. But I think the other very important thing is that it's very different government in Germany. So you have kind of like the federal government at the top with Angela Merkel, who's about, I think her last month of being the kind of prime minister. And then you've got what are called the Länder, which are kind of, they're like counties, but bigger than counties. And each county basically has its own parliament, its own police force. So it's a much more fragmented system. So imagine like Great Britain with like Scotland and Northern Ireland, but then the counties of England broken up as well and having a lot more power than what they have currently. And then you've then got, below the Länder, you've then kind of got the sort of regional areas, and then you've got the sort of town. So you have a lot more layers of government in Germany than what you have in England, but those layers have a lot more power and the ability to raise their own taxes. So, the local government here, the local mayor, only 45,000 people, actually has as much power has more power than John Biggs in some respects. And it seems at times that, when I look at like all of the gardening teams who are going around, working on the parks, it sometimes seems they got as much staff as Tower Hamlets Council for what is a much smaller kind of local authority. And it really shows when it comes to things like, sports or playgrounds or waste and refuse and sort of issues like that. And some of it's just because Germany is sort of, more advanced, but in some areas it's less advanced. So a classic example, the thing that the Memmingen is famous for is they have these canals through the town. And once a year, there's something called Fischertag, where the men of the town jump into the water, and whichever man catches the biggest fish is then the king of the Fisher Day. And there was a court case recently to sort of say, well, actually the woman of the town should also be allowed to jump into the water. And that only happened this year that they won that case. And therefore, I think next year the ladies of the town will be able to jump into the water as well. So on some issues, they are behind us. But yeah, when it comes to the physical stuff, and you'll see this through the pictures, so another good example, which I think is relevant to Tower Hamlets, is a lot of the car parking is underground. So most German apartment blocks, typically, like even in the town, they have this lovely park. Underneath the park is one of the town car parks, so people drive underground, and it's a much more efficient use of space. So you have the nice car park and the playgrounds. Sorry, the nice park and the playgrounds above, and you have your cars underneath. It's the same. Where my mother lives, again, the car park is underground, so she just drives underground. It means there's a lot more space at street level for other stuff. And I think that's probably one of the kind of the main things I think is most useful about in Germany, is just a better use of physical space than what you see in London in terms of and obviously there are some underground car parks in London as well, but nowhere to the same extent as what you see in Germany.
In terms of tackling climate change, are they doing the same approach as we are here, which is trying to stop people from using cars, or is it much more of a diverse approach in terms of climate change? I know I've been reading about micro power grids or like small cooperatives of power companies. They have a
yes. Yes, so it's a very strange mixture. So in some areas they're definitely ahead of us. So especially when it comes to solar, you can go into a small village in Germany and see more solar panels than I see on the whole of the Isle of Dogs. They use a lot more kind of heat pumps and air heat exchangers. So you see a lot of the new builds have these kind of units outside. So basically their heating is kind of done through either, underground heat exchangers or air heat exchangers. So in that area, they're definitely more advanced. But when it comes to use of coal, is actually Britain is well ahead of Germany, because Germany still relies a lot on coal for their power. Whereas if there's a really good Twitter thing that I follow that shows the percentage of coal used in the UK each day, and most days it's 0. So we're almost in the last legs of using coal for power generation in the UK. And in terms of wind, we're probably ahead of Germany because of all of our offshore wind turbines. They have lots of wind turbines on the land. So in some areas we're better than them. In some areas they're better than us. But they definitely do take it seriously as well. But the difference is in Germany is they decided to close their nuclear power stations, which I thought was, given climate change, perhaps not the wisest thing to have done. But that's a whole separate debate.
So you're going to share some pictures on Twitter about Germany and how they do things, and bring some ideas back, hopefully, especially with the rubbish collection. Andrew, I don't know if I've been getting lots of WhatsApp messages, and earlier on, before we started the show, I had an irate neighbor. I didn't do it. Someone fly tipped in front of the driveway, but obviously, you know, a lot of people are irate. So there's a lot of rubbish that's not being collected.
Yeah.
Andrew, have you got to the bottom of why it's not being collected, or have we got a collapse of our council?
So when it comes to those underground refuse bins, I think we've got pretty good detail now as to basically the trucks keep failing, that with the special arms that can pick up the underground refuse bins, that they have problems with the arms, that they're not, and they've ordered more trucks, but they were too slow to order new trucks. The existing ones keep breaking down, and then the manufacturer basically is not delivering on time. But this is all this was fixable with a bit of foresight. But in terms of general rubbish collection, I mean, I think their implication is it's still COVID, but I don't seem to notice those problems in Germany, for example, or in Memmingen, where I am. The sort of case rates, I mean, they're lower than Tower Hamlets, but they're not zero either. But like in Lewisham, where my sister lives, I haven't noticed any problems in Lewisham with rubbish pickup. So there definitely does seem to be a problem somewhere within the system in terms of rubbish collection that we haven't quite got to the bottom to yet. But, you know, another example, so I'm going to hold up this sort of flag. You can't quite see it, but, you know, in every park, they have this board. And if you have a dog and you need to pick up the dog poo, is normally you carry your own bags, but in German parks is they have these sort of bags on like a hook, and you just pull off whatever bags that you need. And actually, I mean, you can't see it on this one because it's black, but they're advertising. So if you're a local company, you want to advertise, is basically you provide these plastic bags. The town council will then put it, you know, in these central locations so people can then pull them off. So it's a great way of advertising your wares, because basically lots of people are pulling your bags off to put their dog poo in each day. So, you know, these are just very simple things. You know, signage is better. There's a lot of really simple stuff that we could copy in Tower Hamlets, which will be the point of the tweets I'll do over the coming days. So, yeah, it's a very nice place to visit.
So looking forward to those pictures, Andrew, and looking forward to the comparisons. So we're nearly to the end of our show. It's going to be next week. Let's see what happens. Whether Aspire pick up the challenge that me and Andrew put on, and if they do take up their responsibilities. But we thank you. I just want to say thank you, everyone, for watching our show and listening in. And we're going to sign off. So I'm Cllr Puru Miah with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. Thank you very much for listening and watching, and have a nice weekend. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.